Good morning, everybody, and welcome to your Friday morning cheer. For those joining the show for the first time, the purpose of Oh, the Places We'll Go is to provide everyone with a shot in the arm in these tricky times. And we do that by interviewing some stellar people to see how they themselves have found resilience and fortitude through the ups and downs of their careers and lives. As ever, our reference point is this lovely, slightly dogged book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. And of course, that talks to the fact that you will be successful and happy and content, but maybe not every day or every week or every month, but you'll get there. And so I am super pleased to say that we have Sir Martin Sorrell on the show this morning. I have to pinch myself a little bit there, but so of course, Sir Martin is the brains behind the world's largest advertising and PR group, WPP, and actually was the longest serving chief executive of a FTSE 100 company, which is no mean feat, but have then of course pivoted into S4 Capital, which within 2 years is now worth more than £2 billion, and on the face of it, going extremely well. So Sir Martin has clearly achieved some amazing things that most of us could only dream of. But I'm 100% sure that it wasn't a 100% straight line path. So today we're going to learn a little bit about what makes Sir Martin tick and what he's learned along the way. So I think it's going to be fascinating to get Sir Martin's views on the world and also to learn how he's pivoted and bounced back when needed. So I'm going to hand over to Richie and to get us started, but thank you very much for joining us, Martin.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you.
Martin,
Resilient Friday, I guess we call it. So.
Yes.
absolutely. Like, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Echo Mark's sentiment. I have to pinch myself too. But look, in lieu of that, let's get on with the first question. Clearly, we're in lockdown 2.0, on the cusp of coming out of it, one hopes. But love to get your thoughts on how COVID has sort of impacted you. And before you get into that, you recently were cited in the media as saying that Brexit Britain faces about 5 to 10 years before we come out with the COVID recovery. So love to get your thoughts on that as well.
Well, on the last, I think it's going to be a hard road. I mean, I think we'll get a deal. I mean, all these negotiation noises coming out from the EU, from Barnier and the French, and so who knows what's going to happen. You'll only know it when the fat lady sings, I guess. But anyway, I think it will be tough afterwards. I mean, if we have no deal, it'll be very, very tough. Will take longer, but if we do get a skinny deal, which I think probably we will, it will still be extremely difficult. I hope for what I call Singapore on steroids, or Singapore on the Thames. Maybe that's a little bit too south or east orientated, but I had hoped that I was a Remainer, but the electorate have spoken, so we have to get on with it. And the UK economy has to pivot its trading patterns from Europe, which was 40-50% of the trading pattern, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain in particular. We'll have to pivot from that to more of America, more of South America, more of Asia, more of the Middle East and Africa. But I think that's going to be very difficult. That's one thing. And the second thing is, with putting COVID to one side for a minute, where we run up these massive debts to quite rightly finance the implications of COVID, we're going to have to sort that out. Somebody's going to have to pay for it. The wealthier are going to have to pay more tax, probably increases in capital gains tax, income tax to capital gains tax to income tax rates, probably corporation tax to increase as well. Maybe ill-advisedly, but that may be the case. Maybe a digital sales tax. I don't know how much that will yield. I don't think that's the best way to go forward, but be that as it may. But then we have to deal with the structural changes in the economy. And for those of you who travel around the UK, parts of the UK are in pretty desperate shape, and are in a pretty horrific condition. And we haven't made the investments. And I say we, it's not just the government, it's public-private partnerships and companies as well. We haven't made the investments in switching the economy from, let's say, the analog to the digital, to put it in the vernacular. And I think that's going to be extremely difficult as well, to find the money to make the hardware investments. Obviously, the ports and the airports and the railways and the roads, that's one thing. But it's also the software, things like 5G, etc. But it's also software in the sense of worker skills, because some skills, whether it be in manufacturing or even in services, are past their sell-by date. And you have to encourage people to be mobile within the country. So and that's not something that we in the UK are used to doing. You know, the conventional wisdom is you buy a house, you stay where you are, you don't move around. So you have to move around from a geographic point of view to where the opportunities are, and you have to be much more flexible in terms of learning skills, etc. So I think for the UK, and I don't want to be gloomy because we're trying to encourage people, but it's going to be a long, hard road, I think, and I do think it will take 5 to 10 years, and I do think the GDP, as a result of leaving Europe, will be down. So it'll dip down. Let's say the trajectory was that. It'll dip down underneath that. Whether it then goes above that growth line and how long that takes is the critical point. At some point in time, you know, the country is very resilient. It has a lot of skills. It has a lot of talent. It will get better, but it's going to take time. So that's one thing. On COVID, I must say, you know, S4 has done well through COVID. We've, you know, now seen our results through to October, and all is very good. And we're back to where we were pre-COVID. So in January, like-for-like growth, top-line growth, which is the key metric which the market looks at, was around 30%, 31%. And February was about 21%, 33 and 21, I think it was. And we're now back in the middle of that range, around 25%. And so we've recovered from COVID. Our lowest month was a +3 in April. So we're not unique, but we're certainly in the V-shaped part of the economy, and the bottom of the V didn't go negative. So yeah, we're very pleased with what we did. We budgeted to grow this year by about 30%, and analysts have us coming out. This is like for like, excluding deals, and analysts have us coming out at somewhere between 15 and 20, and I think we'll be at the north end of that. So a good year, despite COVID. From a personal point of view, we've coped with it very, very well. You know, I've been lucky enough. I had the resources at home, but I would say our people. You know, we now have 3,200 people. We're hiring on the back of the BMW Mini win, and also this week Mondelez we announced as well, or the company announced, the client announced, and we're hiring 300 people in Europe, and we're hiring 300 people in the US and Asia to start on the Mondelez win. So you know we're pretty different. If you look at the advertising and marketing market, the ad holdcos, as they're called, the 6 of them, are probably jettisoning about 50,000 people this year, which is pretty horrendous. Our view is that, you know, tinkering or destroying the human fabric of your company when you're in the business that we're in is suicide. So we think that, you know, what we said was, and we had an easier path through because we're purely digital and we're in the growth sector market. Digital this year, in terms of client spending, is flat. Traditional is down by about 10 to 15. So the holding companies are struggling with a downdraft of 10 to 15, and we're struggling, if that's the right word, with a market that's supposed to be flat to up maybe 4%, and we're growing at so far 16, 17%. So we're gaining share even in the digital market, let alone what's happening in the market as a whole. Our people have reacted very well. And, you know, I'm pretty amazed by those CEOs who get on webinars or on TV or whatever and say, isn't it amazing how people have been able to adapt? Our people tend to be on the younger side. On the media side, 600 of us, they're really average age around 28. On the content side, about 2,400, their average age is probably a little bit older, about 32, 33. Many of them live on their own or in a couple or married or with kids or with their parents. And they don't have the resources that I, to some extent, are fortunate to have. But I must say, I would say on balance, I don't think I'm at risk at saying that on balance, our people have navigated this extremely well from a personal point of view and from a family point of view. And, you know, it hasn't been easy. We haven't suffered as many cases of COVID directly as I thought we would. Maybe that's because of the age range of our people, but our families have suffered, and a number of people have lost members of their family, and that's extremely sad. So there's been a lot of emotional pressure, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster. Obviously, there've been mental health issues, but I think basically, we pulled through very well, and net, we're going to end up with a much more flexible approach to working, 2, 3, or 4 days in the office, maybe, dispersed working, dispersed living, just flexible commuting, all things that are not new. I mean, I don't think COVID has created any new trends. What it's done, it's been a pressure cooker. It's just accelerated the old ones, the ones that we knew were there. So congestion in cities we knew about, the cost of cities we knew about, the desire to work remotely, more flexibility in terms of work-life balance. We knew all about that before. Nothing new there. It's just that COVID-19 has concentrated the minds. So net, no complaints. I mean, it's been a dastardly virus. It's a silent enemy. It's killed almost 1.5 million people, according to the statistics. And we had a very interesting webinar with the wife of one of our people on the media side, created the website at Johns Hopkins University, the dashboard, Dr. Lauren Gardner. We had an interesting, I think it's on YouTube actually, but we had a very interesting hour with her talking about how literally in 24 hours she created that dashboard after the first reported case in the United States. So look, I think all in all, we've managed to navigate our way through a very, very difficult time, and our people have been very resilient to getting to the heart of the places we'll go, and it's all credit to them. And we have a very good platform for next year. I mean, next year, you sort of indicated in your intro, it's going to be a difficult winter. We're going to have, obviously, in the Northern Hemisphere, when the temperature, it's interesting, Lauren Gardner said, it's not temperature that determines necessarily what happens, because I suppose the conventional wisdom is that when temperatures fall, the virus is not as virulent. And she says, in their view, it's about behavior, that when it's cold, you tend to huddle together, stay indoors more, etc. When it's warmer, you tend to be outdoors more. And she said that might be, it's about human behavior that conditions the spread of the virus, not necessarily temperature. But, Northern Hemisphere, winter is going to be a very difficult winter. It already is. The fact that the French can't go to restaurants until January the 20th must be pretty galling for them, and galling obviously for the owners of the restaurants. So the lockdowns are going to affect it. But I think once we get through the winter and into the spring, I'm not saying it's sunny uplands, but the vaccines obviously kick in. We have 2 vaccines with very strong results. AstraZeneca appears to be a little bit more questionable, I think, but they're going to obviously do more research work on that. But basically, somebody like me who's 75 in the vulnerable category can probably look forward to being vaccinated maybe by middle of December, end of December, and into next year. And I think once we get through the winter, I think the spring will be strong. So Q1 maybe, some of the analysts have pulled back their GDP forecast, but for Q1, but next year looks at +5 to 6. I can't remember a year when the global economy was at +5 to 6. And looking at 22, that looks at 4 to 5. So we should have 2 years of strong growth on a bounce back, because this year is -5. So I think that's good. Then we have the vaccines will kick in, which is also good. And then we'll have Euro 21, Tokyo 21. And that's a macro level. At a micro level for S4, we'll have the tailwinds of the account wins. We'll have the growth in digital, with digital as a whole probably will be up 20% next year. Traditional probably up about 3 or 4%. So the ad holding companies are still going to struggle. But if they don't manage to grow next year in Q2, they never will, because the comparables are to -10 or 15 the previous year.
Sir Martin, it's amazing to hear actually your analysis and some of those rich insights that you brought there. And clearly, as part of this, it feels very much like you've got a sense of energy, a sense of optimism. You've clearly been doing the right things with S4. I'd love to really get under the skin of that a little bit and perhaps reflect, perhaps in your early days, when thinking about, say, the inception of WPP, and really kind of get a sense of where that sort of energy, optimism, and even strategic sort of vision sort of comes from.
Well, listen, I honestly don't know. I mean, firstly, I mean, on the optimism side, I think you have to, and we in the early days of the COVID situation, I mean, I was looking at sort of comparable situations. I took great heart. The Harvard Business School have a wonderful case study on the Chilean miners case. If you remember, I think it was 30 miners were trapped underground, 700 meters underground in impenetrable rock, a seemingly impossible situation. And most experts, in inverted commas, gave them up for dead. And the president, actually, of Chile, who took this on board, he said he was advised, actually, it was very interesting. He was advised by his advisors not to touch this, that this was a no-win situation. But he went the opposite. He actually said to the nation, we will bring these people out. He said dead or alive. I wouldn't have said dead or alive. I would just say we will bring these people out, because I think it was harsh, and for the families, obviously, who demonstrated at the site. Anyway, what he did was he hired the best. This was in a private mining company. And he hired the best person from Codelco, which is the Chilean, I think, government-controlled or owned mining company, and brought him in. And he knew he was a man who was very strong, but listened a lot, listened to other people's opinions, but then came to firm decisions, and had obviously demonstrated these qualities historically. Put him in charge. And the guy started to ask everybody, what they should do, because these guys were stuck underground and in this rock that you couldn't drill through, supposedly. And so he asked for everybody's opinions. And a 23-year-old engineer who had no practical or very limited practical knowledge came up with some technological way of addressing this. And I think on day 17 they managed to drill through, and I think it was day 90 or something that they actually brought them out. But it shows you, so the point of the story is two things. One is you have to tell people as it is. You can't gloss over the truth. You can't gild the lily, but you have to give them, a reason for believing. And so, when you think about what the president did, he said, well, I'm going to bring them out. I think wrongly said dead or alive, but he basically made a commitment to get them out. And therefore, the mission was to get these people out, come hell or high water, and they managed to do it in what was regarded, engineering-wise, as an impossible situation. In a way, in those last 2 weeks of March, when everybody was panicking about COVID, and into April, it was sort of similar. So what you have to do, I think, and S4 is just a small example of this. It has obviously ramifications across nations and across continents and everything. Is you have to say, look, call it as it is, but you have to give people a view, and you may not be 100% convinced that you're going to be able to achieve that, do that, but you have to do that, I think, and then you have to drive through. So I would say that. Now, on the other part of your question, where does it all come from? I mean, God alone knows. I don't think entrepreneurs are born or bred. I think it's probably a mixture of the two. I mean, if I look at myself, my grandparents came from the Ukraine, we think, in 1899, penniless, not speaking a word of English. That's my grandparents on my father's side. On my mother's side, they came from Poland, Romania, and between the two world wars. They're all Jewish, all fleeing the Nazis and the pogroms and the Holocaust. And I think that conditions you. I had a father and a mother who didn't have any formal education and wanted me to have the best education I possibly could have. So that conditions you. And I think, immigrant, I'm not an immigrant. I'm basically second generation UK, and my grandparents were from abroad. I think all of that has, being in the ghetto, as I call it, of northwest London, in Edgware, Golders Green, and Mill Hill, in the Jewish community. I mean, that's a little bit of a pressure cooker too. And then I went, to business school, and that was a pressure cooker because every day you spent, your life looking at 3 case studies. What should the chairman and the CEO do and why? And so you got delusions of grandeur at a very early age. And the simple fact was you couldn't run the world when you came out of Harvard Business School. You might be able to run it 20 years on or 30 years on, but not immediately. And so you've got a little bit delusions of grandeur. But I think that's probably the reason. I've always sort of been interested in that stuff. I like scale, so when we started WPP, and I went from Saatchi's to WPP, and that, starting with 0, literally in a room. And then with S4, same thing, literally went into a room, in the case of S4 on my own, in the case of WPP with one other partner. And so it's, you're jumping off the cliff and you have a view. And we had a vision about WPP, which was to build a major multinational marketing services company. S4 is about building a new age, new era advertising and marketing services model. And in terms of scale, I think we're probably, I haven't actually tracked this, but I think maybe S4 has got a faster takeoff than WPP had in its early stages. WPP's seminal moment was 2 years in '89 when we did the hostile bid for J. Walter Thompson, which was 13 times our size. But in terms of market cap, we're up to, about £2.5 billion. And, we're sort of into the 150 of the FTSE at a fairly fast lick. And, different model. The WPP and Saatchi models were market share models, which I don't think any more fit for purpose. The S4 model is a growth model. This is focused on top line growth, not to the exclusion of margin, but reinforced by margin.
So thank you, Sir Martin. Fascinating insights. And on the face of it, S4 is really bucking a trend. So many congratulations to that.
Well, it's not bucking a trend. It's in the sweet spot. When I left WPP, we were wrestling at WPP with growth, as they still wrestle, and they still haven't solved it yet. They're sort of shuffling the deck chairs, but whether that's going to result in any forward motion, we're yet to see. But having said that, S4 is in a way easier. You start with a clean sheet of paper. That's the good news. You're not restricted by any analog or analog albatrosses. And then the bad news is you have no scale, but you can, that's in your own hands to do if you build the business organically and through deals. But we're lucky at S4 in the sense that we picked out the areas where there's growth: first party data, digital advertising content, and digital media.
So Martin,
sorry, Richard, just to follow up there. And I was going to say congratulations on Mondelez, another whopper. Two parts to that. One is straightforwardly, why do you think you won it? You've maybe already talked a little bit to that. But secondly, I'm just interested in that moment when you won. Was that a punch the sky type moment, feeling elated, or just no, next? How do you sort of internalize the successes?
I think, why? Obviously, Wesley Tahar, who's one of the founders of Media Monks. Actually, it's interesting. Victor Knapp, who one of the founders of Media Monks, led the BMW pitch, which was a year and a week in the making. Mondelez was, I think, about 9 months, led by Wesley Tahar, Victor's partner. The honest truth is that you sort of, in the process, you get an indication as to whether you're winning or not. And we were pretty confident. Probably the graph of confidence level sort of rises and if you don't get it, pretty early on, the other contenders, whether you're engaged with the clients, whether you're what their reactions are, and you're getting information sources all the time from multiple sources. So whether you're strong, mediocre or weak. Are you engaging with procurement on the contract negotiation? I mean, often clients will run one or two agencies against one another, even if they made the decision between the two. They'll run one, for contract leverage. But no, look, you pretty know. So there wasn't, we were fairly confident on both, I think, BMW and Mondelez, that not necessarily that we would win, but that we were getting there. So the interesting thing about your question is, in the old days, when I was at WPP or indeed at Saatchi's, if we did Saatchi's, we didn't do quarterly results, but WPP we did, and certainly in the early years of WPP we did half year and full year. We would do our results. They were good results. The markets were pleased, the analysts were pleased. We'd go out and have a lunch, and we'd celebrate it. We might take, a little bit of time to relax in the afternoon, and then, we'd be back to work probably the following morning. Today, to your point, you get very little. You appear to get very little time to celebrate. So the honest answer, the punch, the air, in both cases was probably extremely limited. And it was more about now what's next, and I think that attitude is probably a good thing. I think it's not necessarily good that you don't take a chance to celebrate and take a chance to congratulate one another and laud and appreciate the people who created that success. But I think it's a sad truth. Actually, behind your question, there's a sadness there that we don't take enough time to celebrate. On the other hand, we're continuing to build something. Our objective is to build that new age, new era model. So we have to get on with it. So I think probably the answer to your question is, which we said, where's the next Whopper going to come from?
So Martin, you've had some absolutely incredible highs throughout your career, and I'm sure a few lows.
And some lows.
Absolutely. And perhaps can you identify what are one or two of the most memorable moments that have stayed with you through that journey?
Well, I think when we acquired JWT in 1989, it's ironic that JWT doesn't exist anymore, which is a sad thing. I think people don't understand the value of experience and history, and I think that's a real problem. There's a Luddite attitude, which I think is dangerous. I think it's interesting that I think there was a professor. There's a professor, an Israeli professor. I think his name is Adizes, Adizes, I think it is, and he does sort of management lessons on YouTube. And somebody sent me a tape, a really great tape actually. Well, he has a Israeli accent, which to me makes it even more amusing in its way. But there's a lot of wisdom in what he says. And he said, there was this great debate recently about ageism. One of Mark Reed of WPP made an unfortunate comment about old people, or it was a comment that implied that old people couldn't do anything and that basically they should be on the scrap heap. And what Adizes says is that there's a difference between intelligence and wisdom. That younger people have intelligence, I mean, simply put, and older people have wisdom, and that you're best off having your companies run by older people who have wisdom, and they employ younger people who have intelligence, and the combination of the two is thing. There's a sort of eerie parallel between that and ditching names like JWT and Y&R and Gray. because these companies have history and they have knowledge. And one of the things you learn is that there's nothing new in our business. I remember, it gets into it's an interesting story. When we took over JWT, they had a thing called the Thomson Yellow Pages. And the Thomson Yellow Pages was effectively a telephone directory of who in the company had experience by client, by category, by geography. And if you were pitching a piece of business, let's say it was an auto piece of business in Asia, you could go to that Yellow Pages. It was physical. It had to be physically updated every 3 months, because you won new business or new people came into the company and they had different experience. But basically that idea of an index of corporate knowledge and history is a principle that applies just as much today, except that the technology that you use to winkle that out is totally different. You'll use an online, publicists would say it's Marcel, their AI, what they claim to be their AI intelligence thing. But the point of this is that the principles are exactly the same. And when you collapse brands as venerable as those brands, you lose so much. And I use the word Luddite, and I'll use it again. There's a Luddite sort of disruption to that all that is no good and we know everything. And that's a big mistake, Corporate memory is really extremely important in my view. So coming back to your memorable, so I remember we took over JWT and I was, it was in New York. You have to remember, we were a tiny company. This company was 13 times our size. And I'd been in New York and we concluded the negotiations. They took, I think it was 14 days. Ogilvy 2 years later took 13 days, but very, very similar. We launched the bid at 40. Actually, the numbers were exactly the same, $45 a share. We went up to $50 a share at the end of the first week. And then we reached agreement. It became agreed deals at 55, effectively at the end of the second week. But in the case of JWT, I was in New York, as I was at Ogilvy too, negotiating, and we'd stayed up all night on Thursday, talking to my father as well as I did on the phone about what was going on to get his advice all the time. And I slept a little bit on Friday morning, and then I took the plane overnight from Friday to London on Friday night to London. Was met by the head of special services of BA, a guy called Len Spooner, his name was. He had a copy of the Times newspaper, and the front page lead was about us and JWT, which was quite extraordinary. So, and my parents, who had been in the UK, obviously my father was born in the early part of the 20th century, and they had been in the East End of London, and the Times newspaper was regarded as being pretty anti-Semitic, actually, but certainly by the Jews in East London, if not in truth, certainly in perception. And they couldn't believe, that the front page story was about this little Jewish boy from northwest London, who, with this wire basket manufacturer who had taken over a company 30 times. So that was memorable. So there've been lots of memorable moments like that. David Ogilvy, who called me an odious little shit. The Financial Times in those days didn't print 4-letter words, so it was changed to odious little jerk. And we put OLJ as a little cartoon of me on the annual report with OLJ on it. That was, and then turning David round and his first public apology by letter. I mean, that was memorable. Y&R, Gray. I mean, all those things, all the big deals were memorable moments. Winning pieces of business. I would call out. Gray won the Gillette business from BBDO. I mean, that was massive. But it was I think the most satisfying things were building. It's like we're seeing at S4. You build relationships not necessarily through pitches, which get a lot of ink, but you build them through project by project, what we call land and expand, which are much more satisfying thing and a much more, I think, actually important way. Because what it says is you've done a project, you've done a good job, you add another project, you do something more, and it really builds. and then you get word of mouth. You know, one of the most powerful. So clearly, with BMW, you know, in Germany, we've had two inbound sort of requests as a result of BMW. One of which we've already won, the other of which we're into the second round of. You know, Mondelez, we've had since the announcement 3 inbound conversations, 2 packaged goods, 1 luxury goods as a result, and then another one in telecoms. So you build. I think that's the best way to do it. you get. Obviously, you have the pitches, and I think on the pitches you have to select. You have to select which ones. You have to analyze or estimate where you have the best opportunities. No good in diverting a lot of resources, particularly if you're a small company like us or medium-sized company. You can't afford to divert resources from more valuable projects if your chances of the probability of winning is low. And then you have to figure out where the clients really want quality as opposed to price. Because, you know, clearly, you know, some of these very big pitches, you know, one pitch I heard recently, one of the holding companies gave price guarantees on media, you know, to the tune of 160 million, or on media worth $160 million, and payment terms of 120 days. So, you know, we don't want to win business that is commoditized by winning on payment terms or media price guarantees.
Yeah. Just so some lovely recollections. And I was really interested to hear you say that you sought advice from your father.
Yeah.
So I've got 2 questions about advice. What's the best piece of advice he ever gave you? And then the cliche question, but often the cliche questions are very good. What advice would you give to yourself when you were younger?
On the first, I mean, he said, find an industry that you enjoy, find a company in that industry that you enjoy, build a reputation in it. And then if you want to start a company on your own, go and do that. That was his basic advice. And I think it's very good advice. It's counter to modern conventional wisdom. Modern conventional wisdom is you flip from flower to flower or from job to job and build experience. What he was saying is, you know, find the industry, and the industry I found by accident, really, through James Gulliver, who I was working for, was the advertising and marketing services industry. That company that I really enjoyed was Saatchi's, which I think, you know, I've said on another podcast, I think it probably was the best management team that I've ever seen. I think the management team we have at S4 it's equal, but that was a pretty stunning, you know, whether it's the brothers themselves, Tim Bell, Jerry Sinclair, Bill Muirhead. I mean, these were people who were exceptional and have remained exceptional. You know, Tim sadly died recently, but these are people who've remained exceptional throughout their careers in different ways, even when they went on different paths. So, you know, I think that history was really good. So the advice was to do that. Today, it's not the conventional wisdom. So that's so that was my dad, and you know, I talked to him. I think everybody should have I was going to say father confessor, but you know, you can have a mother confessor too. But everybody should have. You know, you can call it a mentor if you like, but somebody you can talk to. You know, all this stuff about life coaches, I think, is a bit pretentious, but you know what I mean. Somebody that you have to have somebody who is neutral or has your own interests at heart. So, you know, my dad knew nothing about the advertising and marketing services business. I would talk to him about what was going on in the negotiations with JWT or Ogilvy or whatever it happened to be, but you know, he didn't necessarily have any tactical wisdom. He had a hell of a lot of strategic wisdom. He had a great gift, actually, because he was a retailer. He had an amazing, and although he had no training at all, he left school when he was 13. But he understood. He could trigger reactions from people on the basis of understanding their emotions. In fact, in terms of marketing, he was absolutely superb. And he, on several occasions, won't bore you with a story, but he would give me a trigger word. If I inserted a trigger word into a conversation, I would get the desired results. So he was quite sort of exceptional in that point of view. So I think everybody should have somebody they can talk to who has no fear or favor and thinks of things from your point of view. Because when you talk to people inside an organization, they often have an agenda. If you have an advisor outside, they have an agenda. There might be a lawyer or an accountant. I had a lawyer who, after my father died, was a very, very valuable advisor called Phil Reese. But he didn't have, I think, an agenda. But he happened to be the senior partner of our law firm, and I think we were his largest client. And so there was a commercial reason there, but it went beyond that. There was a sort of father-son relationship of sorts there that sort of replaced what I had with my father. So I think that's really important too. On advice to people, I mean, my advice has been pretty standard. Learn code and learn Chinese, and I still believe that's the best thing. So if you think that through, that tells you where I think the world is going. Whether America likes it or not, and that's the big challenge. And the big challenge at the moment, maybe the Biden regime will. I don't think there will be a difference in terms of direction. There may be in tone. It'll be less volatile. It'll be more multilateral in terms of approach. We'll see whether it's effective in bringing things together. I would rather have people together rather than fighting with one another. But I think it's probably pretty inevitable that there is going to be a continued fight or Cold War, and that's not good. That's not good for global growth. It's not good for businesses like ours or UK businesses trying to sort out how they balance America on one side and China on the other. This G2 polarization is not good. But basically, learn code, learn Chinese, maybe Spanish as well, because I'm a big proponent of South America, and I wouldn't forget the Middle East and Africa. But Africa, I was doing a webcast yesterday with when we used to work at WPP in Ogilvy, Nunu, and she's now at Facebook, and we were talking about Africa, and it's so many molecules there, 55 or 57 molecules all moving in different directions, very difficult to plot it out. Middle East maybe has improved. Trump, the Abraham Accords are pretty miraculous. Even the left wing would have to admit that Trump did a pretty good job, that people thought was pretty impossible. Even Jared Kushner, you'd probably give credit for doing that. So there are some other areas of the world, but I think the bookends, North and South America and Asia Pacific, are probably the most interesting.
Martin, thank you for that. We're clearly, just if the time is gone, flash, but I really just want to sneak in one last question before we close. In the spirit of the show, you talked a lot about incredible highs, incredible memorable moments. Perhaps can you give us some of the other side of the scale of perhaps some of those low times and how you dealt with them and what you were able to learn from them?
Yeah, the only thing I will admit to publicly is obviously when we took over Ogilvy, we were over levered. Again, it's a boring story, but we funded it through a convertible preferred. And I remember it was somebody at the Prudential who said to me, Martin, anything you can do with a convertible preferred, you should do with ordinary equity. And he was right, because we had to refinance the company. So that was it. Obviously, leaving WPP was a pretty traumatic, I think basically the board, the chairman in particular, who I think has made a terrible mistake, but he still takes his $500,000 a year from WPP and sort of still appears to be sailing serenely on, but has destroyed a tremendous amount of value there. The value, but I'm still a shareholder. As a shareholder, I'm rather disappointed with the performance. It's gone from 16 billion market cap. I think it's now at 9. It's recovered from 8 to 9. But that's a pretty torrid time for them. So obviously that was difficult. I've had, you know, from my personal life, and life is a balance of family, career, and society. And obviously, from a family point of view, now I've had one divorce. I'm in the middle of another. So from a balancing act point of view, there's been obviously breakage or damage, if you like, in those areas. So getting the balance right between sort of family, and in this order probably, family, career, and society. And I won't again bore you with a story from about HBS and George Cabot Lodge and his views on that Venn diagram of the three circles and how you get a connection between them. But you know, I do think that probably is the most, you know, important thing. I mean, the most important thing is to is the other piece of advice is to try and get as good a balance as you can between those three areas. That's, you know, everybody talks about purpose and diversity, and I think, you know, should add that. Yeah, I think, you know, you have Paul Pullman on and others, and they're real experts in the purpose area. I you know, I agree with the thrust of what Paul is saying and has said. And when he ran Unilever, he ran that brilliantly, and he took that through, you know, a sort of purpose-driven change, which Alan Jope is continuing. Having said that, I think it becomes overly complicated. I think it's really very, very simple. And that is, if you run a business for the long term, you take into account the needs of all stakeholders. So, you know, if you're running a business like ours for the long term, during COVID, you don't chuck everybody out. You keep them, or try and keep them together. You know, you cut your compensation, as we did, by half at the board level. We restored it at the end of September when we felt we'd come out of COVID. So you take the pain to try and keep all the talent that you have on board, because that's, in our case, your lifeblood. It is the human capital that is the capital of the company. It's not financial capital. It's human capital. So I think if you think about it in the long term, and I think that the structures that we have are just too short term. The institutions invest on too short term basis. The people who manage businesses manage them onto the average life of a CM. We were talking yesterday, is about 2 years. The average life of a CEO is about 5 years. And the other thing is there's a separation of ownership and control. So the managers at WPP have no stock in the company. They might have a few options, which a head's eye win tells you lose vehicles. I mean, Warren Buffett said you don't give a call to an institution for 10 years at zero cost. So why do you do it with management? I mean, it's a nonsense. You know, if I have an option, if the share price goes up, I win. If it goes down, I don't lose anything. Managers should have very significant parts of their wealth and their net worth tied up in the company, and they should have the long-term view. That's why I disagree with the corporate governance people who say that, you know, these controlled companies structures are wrong. I think they're right, as long as you don't have a lunatic in control, which is important. You know, I think Mark Zuckerberg thinks about the long-term value of Facebook, and he will do what is Larry and Sergey at Google the same. You know, Musk at Tesla the same. Whatever you think about the valuation of Tesla, right? Jeff Bezos the same. Now you could have some rogue elephants, but by and large, it concentrates the mind on what's in the long-term interest of the company. And John Brown said this years ago at Stanford Business School in 1997. If you put in that qualifier about long-term thinking, everything that Paul talks about falls neatly into place. You treat your people well, you treat the environment well. You know, if you're an oil company, you don't rip it out of the ground. You do it in a planned way and an environmentally better way, or you go to renewables or whatever it happens to be. So thinking about it in a long-term way is absolutely critical. And and you know, I would just add this, you know, private equity is too short term. Private equity is 5 years. That's and they're a key driver of investment and growth. And mark my words, as we enter another few years, a long period of time at zero interest rates, private equity have a natural advantage. And their mindsets, I talk to them quite frequently. I mean, they talk about how they exit before they enter.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's not, rightly or wrongly, that's not what we think about.
Yeah, brilliant insights, Martin. Martin, it's been fascinating to hear your points of view. And as we started at the beginning, congratulations through this period of time on an amazing career, and thank you for helping people to understand a little bit about what makes you tick and what's got you to where you've got to. So, on behalf of Richard,
anybody got any more questions? It's martin@s4capital.com.
Fantastic. Thank you once again. I'm just going to hand over to Richie just to do a bit of an outro and tee up our guest next week. But thank you so much for your time this morning.
Pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Sir Martin. So for everyone else, I know we're a bit running out of time here, and we've taken a bit over. But hey, look, it was certainly. Next week, we have Craig Fenton, Director of Strategy and Operations from Google, on the show. Craig is going to be an absolute cracker of a guest. He's been an entrepreneur, investor, mentor, and founder. He's got a real passion for business and technology, having worked for over 20 years in the sector. What Craig's probably most proud of at the moment is the fact that he's created his own record label, Big Community Records, independent record label to support talented artists from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and areas. So don't miss out on next week's episode, and see you again soon.